Week 3 in fantasy football was a little bit of a disaster for a lot of us, but the lucky thing is that means there's a lot of buy lows on the market right now, and a lot of people are very upset and fed up with the players that are not producing, so that means we can get a lot of players for extremely cheap, and there are some sell highs as well in this video. So guys, make sure to hit that like button as we get into it. The like goal is right here to help me out a ton as a creator, and subscribe to show your support for these consistent videos. The first buy low for this week is going to be Mike Evans, and it might seem a little bit obvious when you look at his past fantasy point performances. He's coming off a week where he had 3.7 fantasy points, 7.2, and then 23.1 in week 1. So something's changed. He is the wide receiver 26 on the year right now, and I guarantee you the owners of him on their team are no better than 1 and 2. So they will be in panic mode. And if you've ever drafted or had Mike Evans on your team before, you know there's gonna be some really big games, and every once in a while there's gonna be some down games as well. That's what happens when you play alongside a really good slot guy like Chris Godwin. And then the Mike Evans owners are looking and saying, why is Chris Godwin, the wide receiver 3 on the year right now, getting all of the usage? Evans is 31. Maybe he's just washed. He's not getting the volume he should. More reasons that people are absolutely panicking on Mike Evans. And Baker Mayfield has been a pretty serviceable quarterback so far. So what's going on here? That answer is one man, and his name is Patrick Surtain. If you just look at the last few weeks, in week 1, he played DK. DK only had 29 yards, 3 catches, 5.9 fantasy points. In week 2, he played George Pickens. He was locking him up. George Pickens only had 29 yards, 2 catches, 4.9 fantasy points. And in week 3, he held Mike Evans to 17 yards, 2 receptions, and 3.7 fantasy points. That is the biggest issue. It is a Patrick Surtain issue, and that is why Mike Evans played so bad in week 3. So I'm not taking last week's game against Mike Evans whatsoever. He does get a great matchup against the Eagles in week 4 coming up this week. They are top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. But a player that it's about his time to sell, his value is going to tank, is Jordan Mason. And we all know Christian McCaffrey is coming back. The closer we get to that return date for Christian McCaffrey, the lower and lower Jordan Mason's value is going to be extremely accelerated. Go look in your league right now for who enjoys some Jordan Mason, for who likes Jordan Mason, because you can get him for some very good season-long startable players. I've seen somebody trade Jordan Mason and Calvin Ridley for Jamar Chase. Like, people definitely want Jordan Mason on their team and just don't see that he's going to be completely useless when Christian McCaffrey comes back into this offense. And Christian McCaffrey is projected to return in about week 7. Now, that could be give or take a few weeks, but either way, the closer we get, the less value he's going to have. So I don't care if we lose value on that trade. It really doesn't mean anything to me. And then we look last week, Jordan Mason had a down week, some would say. Still 19 carries, 77 yards, and a couple catches out of the backfield. His numbers look great. He's still very efficient. All of that is going to keep his value up. And he gets some good matchups against the Patriots and against the Cardinals in these next 2 weeks. Games where the 49ers should be able to control and have a run-heavy script. Go on a hunt, look for those 0-3 teams, package Jordan Mason and another guy together to get one better player, because that's how you want to be doing trades anyways, and go get him for one of these buy low players in this video like Garrett Wilson, a guy who's only averaging 12.1 fantasy points through 3 weeks in the season, and he has severely underperformed his ADP, and a lot of people are panicking on him as well. But what we've seen through 3 weeks is pretty similar to what we saw in his rookie and sophomore season. Just mid quarterback play, decent target share, but not much outside of that. The great news is that he really doesn't have any target competition in this offense still. Allen Lazard is the closest thing to that, and the only reason he's been getting so much usage is because teams are doing everything they can to take Garrett Wilson out of the game, which is why he's averaging less than 6 yards per target. That is very low. The defenses are keeping him in front of them. He was in last week's video as well. Once this chemistry with Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson forms and becomes stronger, he's going to be untouchable and untradeable. But if you guys are watching this entire video all the way through, there is a strategy to trading for Garrett Wilson right now, and it is not trading for him right now. And the reason for that is the most big brain play of all time. They are playing the Broncos, which means Patrick Surtain is going to be on Garrett Wilson. You remember we were talking about earlier in this video, the same guy that's holding every single team's best wide receiver 1 to 5 fantasy points on the year. He's going to be giving Garrett Wilson a very, very tough time. If he puts up less than 10 fantasy points again this week, you are going to be able to get him for absolute pennies. I guarantee you. But hitting you with another buy low candidate back-to-back here is going to be Jonathan Brooks. And if you've watched any of the videos earlier in the pre-draft, you know that I was not on Jonathan Brooks. I was telling you not to draft him. His ADP is way too high for this exact reason. After week 3, after week 4, after week 5, people are going to forget the vision of Jonathan Brooks and why they drafted him. After 4 weeks of just having to sit and wait on him and see everybody else have these running backs and these players that perform, it's just a fact his value is going to go down a little bit, whether we want it to or not. And you can get him on your team for waiver players or guys that you drafted way lower than him and return on that value way, way, way more. And this is why we're going to be trading for him now, before he comes back. And with Andy Dalton coming into this offense being confirmed to start in week 4 and probably a ton more games after that, he has made Chuba Hubbard a very good fantasy running back. He had 27.8 fantasy points last week, over 100 yards, 28 total touches. That also makes the speculation for Jonathan Brooks even lower if we have Chuba Hubbard being a very, very good fantasy running back, which he probably will be until Jonathan Brooks comes back. But once he starts making that return talk in week 5, week 6, maybe week 7, you're going to have to give up a ton more. And even in his first 2 weeks, Jonathan Brooks, I don't expect him to be startable, nowhere near that. But this is a guy that the Panthers drafted in the 2nd round as a running back, coming off an ACL tear. Like, he is a good player. He's going to be used. That's probably going to start happening later down the line in the season in the back third. But onto the other side of the ball, we are selling Chuba Hubbard, and we have to. The Brooks hype isn't too big yet. They get a tough matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals run defense in this week coming up. They are bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs per game as well. It's a tough defense all the way around. I don't expect the Panthers to be as successful against the Bengals as they were against the Raiders. It's two completely different defenses. There's also just less film on Andy Dalton with this offense, with these players, with these coaches on the Panthers than any other team, which is why backup quarterbacks usually come in and play pretty good for the first game or two until they get figured out. I expect that to kind of happen with Andy Dalton in the fact that we're not going to be getting 30 points a game from the Panthers, more like 10 to 20. But with that and Chuba being the RB1, only averaging 57% of the snaps, not much is telling me that he's going to secure an RB1 role workhorse for the rest of the year. But another true sell high is DeAndre Hopkins, and I'm sure you can tell the idea that's going on here. The Titans wide receivers are just a revolving door of sell highs. Levis has no time to pass. This offense looks absolutely terrible, whether that's his fault, the offensive line's fault. It doesn't matter. They are pretty much last in almost every single offensive metric. The Titans put up 14 points, then 17 points, then 17 points again in their first 3 games. They can't score. They cannot move the ball. When you have 2 very good wide receivers in Calvin Ridley, in Hopkins, and even Tyler Boyd, like, there's a ton of target competition and you can't score. There's more underlying issues. Now you look at DeAndre Hopkins and you say, well, he's really only been playing 40% of the snaps, still coming off his injury, and he put up a pretty good fantasy point game last week. Why can't that continue when he starts getting more usage and more snaps? Eventually, it's just going to keep going up linearly. Well, that could be the case, but at the same time, this offense probably won't get much better, and you're still going to have all of this target competition, and Tajay Spears is only getting more healthy, more just competition out of the backfield, even though that doesn't necessarily clash. It's more of the wide receivers that do, but even then, I don't want to have to keep hoping that DeAndre Hopkins will put up a good week and he ends up putting 1 like Calvin really did last week. He's got the name value. He's coming off a big game. I'd rather just sell him, do a 2-for-1 deal, get him off my team, and not have to worry about the boom bust that he brings. Now, this might be a little bit obvious. We're going to trade for Tyreek Hill. I do not care about the quarterback situation. At this point, we can sell an Amari Cooper and a Jawan Jennings to get Tyreek on our team. And if I can do that, I'm 100% doing that instantly, because we do have the chance that Tua does return at some point later down the line of the season. Now, is that a high percent chance? I wouldn't say so, but if he does, positive for Tyreek. We also have the chance that Skylar Thompson comes back into this offense at some point, which is a very high chance. Also a positive for Tyreek, because the last full game, fully healthy game that Skylar Thompson played with this offense, he gave Tyreek 15 targets. Now, are those targets going to be as high quality of fantasy points per catch? No, because he's not as good of a quarterback as Tua, throwing downfield and all the other aspects of being a quarterback. But still, 15 targets is about 10 catches. Usually, that's 10 fantasy points. Like, the volume is still going to be there, even if it's not as good. I'm more worried for Jalen Waddle than I am Tyreek Hill, because he's still going to be the focal point of this offense, no matter who the quarterback is or how bad it looks. So with all the quarterback trouble, Tyreek only putting up 7 points, the Miami Dolphins losing 3-24, his value is lower comparatively to what it usually is going to be, and you can get him for cheap compared to a Tyreek Hill. Like, he really can't be that cheap in general. But looking at a tight end, probably my favorite sell high of the week, so make sure to listen into this, is Dallas Goedert. And this is great because you can sell him for another tight end so easily. The tight end pool right now is absolute trash. It is a burning dumpster fire. Let's just look at these top tight ends that we drafted. Travis Kelce, he's a tight end 20 through 3 games. Sam Laporta, tight end 15. Mark Andrews, tight end 26. Evan Ingram is injured. George Kittle is injured. Njoku is injured. Pretty much every single one of the top tight ends is starting terribly or injured. But then you have our savior Dallas Goedert putting up 27 points last week and the tight end 1 overall on the season. That's some fake value, because we didn't have A.J. Brown. He was out for this game. Devonta Smith left in the late half of the game with a concussion. And we also had Covey, the wide receiver 3, injured in the first quarter almost. And if you've ever had Dallas Goedert on your team before, you know he has his big games every once in a while. But majority of them are not going to be that good, in about like the 7-8 range. If I can sell Dallas Goedert for any of those tight ends in that order, I 1000% would do it instantly. AJ Brown's coming back. Devonta Smith probably isn't going to miss time with his concussion, and Jahan Dotson still exists, I guess, if you want to count him as a target competition guy. But another very, very good sell high that I would love to get off my team right now is Devin Singletary, coming off a game of 18.8 fantasy points, averaging 14 fantasy points per game, and he's the RB15 right now. That is crazy, because if you look at his usage, it's actually been pretty valid. Through those last 2 weeks, he's averaged 16 carries a game, but he has a very tough schedule leading up to his week 11 bye. Just some of the games here: Seahawks, Bengals, Eagles, and Steelers. Those are either teams with a really good run defense or very good offenses that's going to make the Giants have to lean more pass heavy and lean less on the run game with Devin Singletary. And the Giants have been winning their last 2 games, which is why he's seen an increase of usage over those last 2 weeks. It's pretty much a 1-to-1 situation. It's very evident that when the Giants are going to be losing games, Devin Singletary is not going to be involved whatsoever. It's not the game script. And now we have Tyrone Tracy actually emerging into this offense. For the first 2 weeks, he saw 21% of the snaps. Last week, he saw a season high at 31% of the snaps, as well as season highs in carries with 5, yards with 23, receptions out of the backfield with 2. And while that's not amazing numbers out of the jump, it's a start and it's a hint into what can happen. I think this backfield at one point in time during the late half of the season will be more 60-40 between these 2 running backs. And if the offense isn't going to consistently be winning or close in games, Devin Singletary is in for a bit of trouble. But that is going to finish off this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one coming tomorrow.